So the stranger said to the two travellers on the road, "What matters are you discussing as you walk along?" In Cherry Orchard they say, "What's the story?" That's the kind of greeting, if you like. So Jesus was anxious to hear what was on their minds. And we heard some of what's on your minds earlier this evening in the prayers. I'm sure there's a lot more in other prayers. But these two disciples, because of what had happened beforehand, were in a particular mood that journey. And they were walking away from Jerusalem. That's the way of saying that they were giving up on Jesus. They'd seen the crucifixion and all their hopes looked like they were being dashed. And it says their faces were downcast. So they were really disappointed, they were disillusioned, they were down. You could ask the same story for us in Ireland today. What's the story for us as Christians, as Catholics? And there's a lot, as you know well, to be downcast about. Think of the sexual abuse and the way it was handled. You think of church teaching in areas of sexuality and gender and the way it's not easily accepted by people. You think of the loss of the prestige of the church and its teaching, the way the last two referenda went, and against what the bishops, for example, had wished for. You think of the drop of vocations to the priesthood. You think of that word secularization, that a lot of people, and especially younger people now, don't seem to feel the need of God in the way that people did before. So there's that phrase which is sometimes used, that God is missing, but not missed. Some people don't feel it in their guts, if you like, that need of God. And then you think of the economy at the moment in our country, which on the one hand seems to be doing very, very well, and yet you have this awful scourge of homelessness, the difficulty of getting houses, health care, getting access to the system, and just downright poverty, food banks and so on, side by side with great wealth. And a lot of those kind of things, now there are very good things as well, but I'm looking at the bad things, if you like, at the moment, because this is the way these two disciples were. They were downcast. And a lot of that came together last week at the funeral of Lyra McKee in Belfast, the woman who was shot down in Derry. She, as you know, was good friends with the Catholic priest, Father Martin McGill, who spoke at her funeral. And she had posted a picture to him shortly before her death of herself dressed up as a nun for a charity event. She was acting as in Sister Act to raise funds for the hospice. And she had said as a caption to him, "Can I give you a hand at Mass on the following day?" So you know the sort of person she was. She was full of fun and yet full of seriousness. And so behind the banter and behind the great sadness that accompanied her death, there was something there that was saying things about how we are as church in Ireland today. The choice of a Church of Ireland venue for the funeral, because for the LGBT community it was felt as more hospitable. It was a kind of more welcoming space than a Catholic church might be. And then the banter with Martin McGill, who spoke powerful words at our services, you know, about the role of women in the church and even the issue of ordination. And of course then the opening that gave to politicians and the common good. When they drew near the village to which they were going, he made as if to go on, but they pressed him to stay with them. So the stranger, who later becomes clear to them was the risen Jesus, doesn't force himself on them, and he doesn't force himself on us. He's going to go on after he has explained things to them, but they were eager to hear more and they invited him in. And so he has explained to them about the way he sees things, the way he understands the scripture, that these things had to happen, if you like. And he has a different take on things. And Pope Francis has a different take on the church at the moment, and the way we can be church together in a new way, more suitable to our times. And he calls this a synodal church. And the word synodal means walking along the way together, like those two disciples of Jesus. And the way Pope Francis sees it is that in the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, they talked about the church as the people of God. And so, on a pilgrimage, if you like, walking. And the image up to then had been a very institutional church, with the bishops in strict control, and then a hierarchy of priests, religious, and the lay people at the bottom. And the Pope wants to subvert that. He talks about an inverted pyramid, where the most important people are the baptized people of God, you. And each person who's baptized gets a share in the priestly role of Christ, the prophetic role of Christ, and the kingly role of Christ. And by prophetic it means teaching. And that means each of you, in however way we organise it, through your experience of life, whether young or old, should have some input into church teaching. And some way of saying to the bishops when they teach, having listened to you, that they've got it, or they haven't got it. And similarly with regard to decision making in the church, we have to find a way in our church to allow for voices to be heard, the voices of lay people. And so, in the future, going back to an older model that was there at the start, if you can imagine a stool with 3 legs, one leg will be the bishops and the Pope, and they continue to be very, very important. And the second leg will be theologians, whether they be priests or nuns or lay people, who have a bit of expertise in thinking about the church. But the third leg is you. So people who are trying to live their lives well, and Francis talks about this as the sense of the faith, or the sense of the faithful, and that should be part of the church teaching. And that all of this very rich mix of ideas and desires, often in contradiction and so on, should be discerned, is the word he used. As a group, we should be able to discern what way the Holy Spirit is leading us forward. And so, what he wants to have happen in the church, instead of just teaching coming on high, he wants a more open, consultative way of talking about things. Not being afraid to mention things that are deep within us and which we've kept to ourselves, if you like, for fear of being awkward. And as well as that culture of debate, he wants certain structures and institutions put in place, like a parish council, like a diocesan council, like councils and synods at a national level, at a regional level, at a universal level. And he thinks with that kind of organic structure, you can have change that's faithful to the teaching of Jesus Christ. And some of those changes have begun to happen. The new attitude towards divorce and remarriage, the way that the bishops listened carefully to young people between the ages of 18 and 30 at the recent synod, and came back understanding that young people were not simply to be preached at, but they were to be approached with respect, with invitation, with love, and asked for their ideas. Not to bring in pre-packaged answers, but to listen to the sort of questions that they have. And I think gradually our own bishops are beginning to cotton on to this. The Bishop of Limerick had a synod quite recently. Your own Bishop Nunty has spoken in favour of Pope Francis's ideas, as have several other bishops in Ireland. And I think if we get into that kind of space, we can begin to re-examine some of the teachings which, in fact, in our hearts, we haven't been able to receive. And it will open space for others who haven't been able to accept them either. Both Peter and John look straight at him. That's in the first reading, where before the cure, if you like, they look straight at the person who was crippled. And that's the wonderful thing about the relationship with Jesus, that however we imagine it, as in the Gospels, Jesus looks steadily at the rich young man. Jesus looks steadily at each of us. He loves us so much. And it's like the love of two human beings who can look one another in the eye. As you know, that happens, if we're lucky, at a younger stage in life, and then as we grow older sometimes, because there goes a bit of routine, we forget to look at one another anymore. But that gaze of love is something that is never gone from the relationship between God and us. And so, whatever sort of church we have, and we're only trying to build an organisation, reform and renew it, the most important thing is not the organisation of the church. It's the relationship that we have with God and with Jesus Christ that each of us has. And we're being asked to grow that, if you like. It's wonderful here this evening to see a packed church and to hear the beautiful music. But you know that in many parts of Ireland, and you will be travelling and so on, that that's not so. And we can't rely anymore in a place like Ireland on the faith being handed on seamlessly to our children and our grandchildren. The culture is different. The transmission belts are broken, if you like. And what we have to keep coming back to is the relationship with Jesus Christ. Because if that's strong, then it will be handed on. The great German theologian Karl Rahner experienced that already back in the 1970s in his own country. And he said the Christian of the future will have to be a mystic. And he didn't mean like all those good sisters here in the Poor Clares who are specialised in that. He meant you in your ordinary lives, the ability to find God in the ordinary things of life. And there's a wonderful piece in Pope Francis where he talks about what holiness might mean in daily life. And that's the theme of our novena this year, the importance of faith in our daily lives. And Pope Francis says that we're all called to holiness. It's a very radical kind of thing, because it's not a word we like to use very often nowadays, and it's not one that we spontaneously think of, that how could I be called to holiness? And yet he's saying that that's so. The Lord asks everything of us, and in return he offers us true life, the happiness for which we were created. He wants us to be saints, and not to settle for a bland and mediocre existence. And then he gives an example of what holiness might mean, what he calls the small gestures. And it's interesting because it isn't what you might imagine. Listen to what he says. Here's an example. A woman goes shopping. She meets a neighbour and they begin to speak, and the gossip starts. But she says in her heart, no, I will not speak badly of anyone. This is a step towards holiness. Later at home, one of our children wants to talk to her about his hopes and dreams. And even though she is tired, she sits down and listens with patience and love. That is another sacrifice that brings holiness. Later she experiences some anxiety, but recalling the love of the Virgin Mary, she takes her rosary and prays with faith. Yet another path of holiness. Later still, she goes out onto the street, encounters a poor person, and stops to say a kind word to her. One more step. So it's a very simple kind of thing. It's woven into our daily lives. That's what we're being called to. And so like those two disciples who are on a journey, we're on a journey in our church in Ireland. And those two disciples started off by being downcast and very sad and disillusioned, feeling defeated, if you like. And they ended up saying to one another, did not our hearts burn within us? They changed, if you like, from desolation to consolation through meeting with the stranger who turned out to be Jesus. And we can hope in Ireland that that's where we're going. There's a lot of stuff that needs to come down, that needs to tumble down, that isn't part of what Christ's church is, including that kind of unthinking clericalism which Pope Francis often critiques. But that doesn't mean us all stepping forward, if you like, and assuming our own responsibility. And we can hope that over time then, as happened to those two disciples, we can see the re-emergence of the church in which the lyra and the keys of this world would be at home now. A church to which young people are attracted, and a church which can make a strong contribution to the common good of Irish life. And this is the journey we're on already. And this is the journey that we ask the Lord to continue to bring us along to that point where we can say with the two disciples, did not our hearts burn within